that's used is that you're going to turn to, you like worshiping the creations of your hands, right? So we think about this, and this applies especially in Leviticus. We talk about building idols. But every time we think about that, I think that we are helping ourselves to dissociate, right? Oh, I don't go home and worship to a statue, therefore I don't practice idolatry. But the true idolatry is believing that it's us, right? We really idolize ourselves instead of having the humility to understand that were I not born to this country, to this time period, to those parents, to whatever, that my situation would be very different. There were some hands. Bobby?
I think it's axiomatic that coming into leadership is transformative. The question that God raises to Moses is how he's going to transform you. Moses had an issue with delegation. He wouldn't delegate. He learned to delegate, which made him a better leader and a better person and able to address the problems of the people. Some people don't delegate, but there are other issues. In any event, you're not the same person you were before you became the leader. You are transformed.
Thank you, former president. A couple more.
I agree with Bobby that it is transformative. Becoming a leader is transformative. However, I think also the perception of to whom someone must answer for his activity and his deeds is very important. And that transition in society, or at least society as we know it now, often results in feeling that you answer to society or you answer to power rather than answering to God. And so we're comparing a situation where people, I guess we have to orient them toward answering to their higher feelings as opposed to answering to the pressures that are put on by society.
Beautiful. I agree with you. I was actually once in a meeting here, and somebody who no longer works here, so nobody has to worry about it, but said, like, we have to remember who we answer to. And they were talking about the board. And I said, no. Like, we answer to God. We are a religious institution. That doesn't mean that I disregard the board, right? But like, what is our higher goal? And I think like you bring up something very powerful, and we have to wonder about our system. Oh, my hair's making this crackle. I don't know what's making. Is that? Oh, okay. We have to wonder about a system where we are set up to, once somebody is elected and placed into office, that they become more beholden to the purse strings than to the people or the greater good. Like how, I don't know how to fix that. I think if anybody did, we'd have, whatever's after democracy, or like this new form of democracy, right?
In the movie Patton, at the end of the movie, Patton was a great believer in history, said this, that when the hero comes back with all his spoils and all his slaves and goes parading before everybody, he is placed in the front chariot, but next to him is a slave holding the laurels and whispering in his ear, "All glory is fleeting. All glory is fleeting." Which, of course, you may think that you're the greatest person in the world. You're nothing, like wind, like dust in the wind. It disappears because of time.
Beautiful. Little Kohelet kind of there, right? The Havel, Havelim.
I think there's another problem, too, that a leader can become dedicated to an end and forget about the need to use proper means to achieve that end and become distracted.
Beautiful.
And that can lead to also to
Beautiful. So that's like when one of the interpretations of tzedek, tzedek tirdov, right? Justice, justice shall you pursue is like, don't just focus on the ends, the just ends, but you need a just means to get there as well, which makes for less exciting Hollywood movies. But yeah.
About what you said before, answering to the board versus answering to God. I think if it's a good and holy board, then answering to the board is kind of one and the same in terms of what it is everyone wants to get done. If it's an evil, godless board, then you have then you have a choice to make.
Yeah.
You know.
Says another former president of the board. Okay. Yeah. No, we're very lucky. But there's just certain. It was just a certain.
One last comment.
It wasn't that I thought the board was godless at all. It was.
One last comment. We've all heard the expression on the dark side of leadership that absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
The other side, the corollary is that leaders are accountable. And when a leader forgets that he's accountable and to who he's accountable, that's where he goes down the path of corruption. Whether that's his intention. How many leaders do we know that had good intentions and ended up on the wrong path?
Yes. All right. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at a few more. All right, so one of the things for us to notice before we go to the Rabbeinu Bachya commentary on the third, I numbered it 3 because I put all the Vayikras without any numbering. One of the things to note is just that the other people, right, that, they talk about the anointed priest, the community leadership, a person, right, that these are also, we also think of these as leadership roles. This isn't the ruler, this isn't the top honcho, but they are accountable in a different kind of a way. So that's what Rabbeinu Bachya picks up on in our third text. Will you read? Thank you.
A king who has no religious authority and to whom neither the people's purity nor their piety is directly entrusted is much more likely to err and sin. Therefore, the Torah used the expression,
I'll share.
Hebrew,
Sorry.
share.
I
to indicate that the Torah considers the fact that a king will sin at one time or another as a given. Kings have a hard time combating their arrogance, and it is therefore not unusual for them to become guilty of sins.
Okay. So here we're seeing, so the king is not the religious authority, right? So the priest is the religious authority. And the people's purity and their piety isn't entrusted to them. Right? So you think about on the high holidays before like the first thing we do, I'm going to say before we start the service, but it's really at the start of the service, is the cantor says a special prayer asking that the cantor's sins be forgiven as the cantor is used as a conduit for the congregation. Okay? We don't want, as we are up there fallible, right? We are not perfect. We all have our own, musar that we're working on, right? Like different character traits that we need weaknesses that we have. We don't want the fact that we're imperfect or our prayers are imperfect or that, that we are these imperfect conduits, right, to taint the congregation, right? But the king doesn't have that. The king's not a conduit. The king is a figurehead, right? So the king has this power and doesn't have to worry about if the king is corrupt, it tainting the sacrifices that the king is offering, right? Because the king's not offering any sacrifices. Well, maybe the king's offering, but not on behalf of other people, only on behalf of the self. So there is this extra layer that Rabbeinu Bachya points out. And I wanted to share this text because another one shares a similar thing, but his emphasis here is really kings have a hard time combating their arrogance, right? So this is his main thrust, that the problem with somebody being in leadership is that they're going to become arrogant. They're going to think that they deserve it, right? So like, what's that famous Woody Allen line? I wouldn't want to be part of a club that would have me as a member, right? Oh, thank you. Well, I'm glad you guys can actually source. This is how I source. You guys. Thank you. That there's something about when you get into a position, right, that maybe at first you're humbled by it, but often it's hard for people to hold on to that humility, right? Yes, Sherry.
Just a real quick question. What happens?
It's just for the people at home.
Okay, real quick question. What happens when the king uses his religiosity to influence other people and they become sinners because of what he's saying, because he's using religion for him to justify what he's doing or what he's not doing?
Okay, so this is huge. This happens again and again. This happens again and again in the later books of the Tanakh. And we'll look at some of that. But it even happens in Parshat Pinchas, right? Part of the problem with Tisbe and Hosbi. Thank you. This is why you guys are amazing. Part of the problem is that we have a princess and a prince, right? A chieftain and a princess, right? And this is the leadership that is having sexual relations in front of the Holy of Holies. That's why they get shish kebabbed, okay? It's the example, and guess what, right? The people are following the example. So you bring up a really important point, and we actually see this later with kings. This is part of the reason why we're warned, we men are warned not to have like so many wives, because those wives can lead you astray to worship other gods, right? You know, sorry that men can't think for themselves. It's only the women who could lead them astray, possibly. It's the Torah. I don't know why the Torah thinks so low of men. Gotcha. So you bring up a very good point, Sherry, that there is really a danger in particular of the king, right? Because when we see our public, our official, our leader, our representative to the world acting in a certain way, right, that becomes the ideal, right? So this becomes very hard then, right, when the king or the president or the prime minister, or pick your leader, right, acts in a way that you don't want your children to emulate or your neighbors, right? And this, again, is why, the king has all of these special rules, because, and they're not supposed to amass too much wealth or too many wives or too much property. But it happens, right? We don't have any warnings against things that don't happen. Okay. So many texts. I can't help myself. So the next text is Eli Bunk. So this is a more modern, all the way from 1992, a more modern commentary. So he points out how the high priest, right, who we had in this text from Rabbeinu Bachya, is in constant contact with what is holy, but also says the Sanhedrin as well. Right? So the Sanhedrin is like the Jewish Supreme Court, right? It's their checks and balances, right? And if you think we have a lot of representatives on the Supreme Court, I mean, the Sanhedrin puts that to shame. So he says, they lived in a world of ideals, right? So they're always working towards, like, what is the ideal? What is the divine? What is God asking of me? How can we move closer to God's image of a perfect world, a perfect kingdom, justice, etc.? But the king or political ruler is involved in secular affairs, right? So they're working with the real, with the day-to-day. He says war and peace, the administration of government and international relations. Okay, so they were more likely to sin because their day-to-day concerns were not religious, but pragmatic. Right? It's very easy for me to get up on the bima and give a sermon about a happy, just, balanced world. Pick your topic, right? But actually making that happen is not easy, right? That's the work, that's hard, and we're gonna mess up and mess up and mess up, right? So here he's pointing out that the king has to deal with the day-to-day. Like, sure, you go, I mean, especially in this time period, right? This is, going and literally offering offerings on an altar, right? You can get that right? You can master that. I'm sure there will still be flubs, and I've been studying Talmud every day, and so have you, so you know that there's like whole chapters of the Talmud dealing with said flubs. But there's a formula. There's no perfect formula for actual governing. So here we know so he's pointing out like that, yes, arrogance, right? Arrogance may be the reason why the king sins. I have all this power, it's going to my head. But also, like, king has to deal with the day-to-day, right? And so much of our day-to-day is trying to figure out the balance, right? Because so much of our values are things that are lived in balance, and a lot of what we disagree about is how much emphasis we should put on one under the other, right? So, for example, immigration, we all want to be welcoming and not have people be persecuted and tortured and starve and die in other countries, right? But we all also want to live in security and health and prosperity. And, like, how do we balance those things? And, so some of us are a little more this way, and some of us are a little more that way. Some of us are a lot more that way. Okay. So, and now we have, on text number 5, I want to read text number 5, because this is another reason why the king may go astray. Thank you.
Mayor Simha Cohen of Vince points out that a king was especially vulnerable to being led astray by popular sentiment. Neither a priest nor a judge in the Sanhedrin were answerable to the people. The king, however, relied on popular support. Without that, he could be deposed. But this is laden with risk. Doing what the people want is not always doing what God wants. That, Mayor Simha argues, is what led David to order a census and Zedekiah to ignore the advice of Jeremiah and rebel against the king of Babylon. Thus, for a whole series of reasons, a political leader is more exposed to temptation and error than a priest or judge.
Okay. Right? I want to stay in office. Right? So that's, so we even, these are the examples he uses, David and Zedekiah. We could even think of Moses, though, right? Sending the spies. He did that because that's what the people wanted. We could think of Aaron, right? Building the golden calf, right? So where the king has the arrogance, the king has to deal in the real world, and the king has to answer to the voters, right? So here we have like wherein we are set up for sin. We, because we're all kings, but yes, like where the king is set up for sin. Okay. The Rabbeinu Bachya, I gave this whole thing because it's like so beautiful, but I think we're going to skip over it. Except for the end, because the end adds. So and on 6, do you see the last paragraph? It was not accidental that the princes, the nearest thing to kings the Israelites had in those days, donated the precious stones for the shoulder piece and breastplate of the high priest, as they were to atone for the sin of arrogance. So I don't know. Another section that we often kind of gloss over, our eyes glaze over when we read it is about the priestly garments and what the priests are going to wear, right? We have the exciting, riveting section about animal sacrifice, right, which we don't practice anymore, and then we have the dress, which we don't wear anymore, although the Torah is dressed up, the Torah dress is inspired by the priestly dress. But the priest is supposed to wear shoulder pads, right? So don't think that the 80s started that look. It was the priests. But on the shoulder pads, they have the names of the tribes, and then they have the breastplate, right, with the Choshen Mishpat, right, and all of the tribes. So they're literally carrying the weight of the community in their outfit. And who were those donated by? The priests. The priest gave the shoulders. I'm sorry, I meant the princes. Yes, the princes, right? So these people who have power. So they had to give up a little bit of humility in that. Okay, so yes, yeah.
And the princess, one could argue, was probably... The princess, one could argue, was probably arrogant. So the arrogant is donating the stones to decorate the dress to pray, to atone for arrogance.
Yeah.
So I just kind of find that an interesting, juxtaposition.
I think, and it goes kind of back to the bull being like this, as I like how you said, it's like your Tesla, right? That, what is a value, right? So, and what is a value to one person versus another, right? So one of the things about royalty is having bling, right? Having jewels, right? So I'm giving them to the priest. And the priests were, this was the priestly role, kind of, got taken up by prophets and by rabbis, right? But that's your conscience balance, right? Yes. Wait, let's give you a mic. I don't know where a mic is. I know where this mic is. I don't know. Oh, it's up here. Sorry, it's on my. Hi. Good to see you.
Good morning, Rabbi. It occurs that if is a very big word because if separates leaders from those who lead. So if is the conditional. Mm-hmm. We actually elect someone, be it a political leader or rabbi or the president of a congregation, to help us understand to help us understand the conditional. If you do this, then this will happen. If you don't do this, then this will happen. And the quality of leadership and the penchant for arrogance seems to trade on how well a leader, deals with the conditional, deals with the if. We also come across this as parents. If you don't eat this, then you won't get candy later on. You won't get a snack later on. If you don't study, you won't be able to get into a good university or college. And how we deal with the if. Do we deal with it angrily? Do we deal with it in an appealing way? Do we make castor oil seem to taste good? Right? We choose some people who don't deal with the conditional well in their own lives. And so their ability to help us deal with the conditional is pretty limited.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
Also, I think part of this has to do not just with jewels from princes, and because the whole community actually donated to the Mishkan.
Yeah.
I think it has to deal with taking the everyday and the mundane and the things that we have in front of us and use them for a holy purpose. And I think that's what God is trying to, or the Torah portion is trying to get across, is that it's to be used for a higher purpose, and that we can transform our daily lives to make it more holy.
Beautiful.
So I agree with what you said about the if, but I think it's more about the leader. A good leader, to me, knows there's going to be a when and tries to set in place mechanisms that deal with when rather than if, so that when I make a mistake, when I don't, or first of all, how do I surround myself with people or advisors or accountability that tries to lower the when, and then when I do make a mistake, what's the mechanism that's in place to help me deal with it? So it's almost to me that the key to leadership is a person that acknowledges there will be a when, and how do I try to mitigate those circumstances that happen when there's a when, not an if, because we know there will be. And I think that's the danger of a leader that says, when I become the leader, there will never be these problems.
Right.
Mistakes are inevitable.
Right.
Right, I mean, we're fallible. I mean, this is, as much as we try to cast ourselves in God's image, I mean, we're fallible. So the when is going to...
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's really like getting back to this line, right? That it's not an if, it is a when.
But
It's
go ahead.
interesting
to me, though, the Torah requires that fallible leader to make a public demonstration of his guilt and acknowledgement of his guilt. And when they, if you're sacrificing a bull,
Yeah.
the world's going to know about it, or your world is going to know about
Beautiful. So here, hold on. Right, so if this is a very public demonstration, and hold on, okay. So if you look at text number 7, and then we'll go to Roberta. This is the Midrashic approach, which Rafi, wow. After singing Baby Beluga, he made this Torah commentary. Rashi actually is quoting Sifrei Vayikra. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the word asher may be understood as ashrei. Hail to the generation whose king offers a sin offering for having committed an inadvertent sin. He is humble enough to acknowledge an error and seek forgiveness. How much more so he is likely to repent and ask forgiveness for sins committed knowingly. All right, so if you're going to apologize for the little stuff, the accident, and take ownership of things that you didn't even know you were doing, all the more so you would take ownership of something where you're like, yeah, you're right, I did that. if the people observe, and this is Judy's point, if the people observe that their king acknowledges errors by offering a sin offering, how much more so will their subjects be encouraged to acknowledge their mistakes and bring sin offerings and ask God's forgiveness? So, okay, so, all right, Roberta.
So what strikes me also,
Oh, on the bottom. It's on the bottom.
what strikes me also is just the public nature of the acknowledgement and the expiation of the sin for everybody, kings and everybody else. That is amazing, and I look at the contrast between biblical times and today, and I wonder, like today, nobody, exposes themselves. Everybody's infallible. Everyone is so perfect, and, nobody makes a mistake. And if you make a mistake, you're defensive, or it wasn't me, or, that's what we really see so much in our world today. And I wonder, like in biblical times, and these laws were written and they're on the books, was it like, a public embracing of this, or was there, like today, nobody, very few people really, do that work. I mean, you might do it within your home and your family, but I don't see it going on, especially amongst our leaders. So I wonder when this became, what was the consensus at that time? How easy was it for a person, because they were in that environment, to publicly, a leader publicly, to do that? Was it part of their DNA, or was it really hidden? Because like today, we don't see it.
Right. I think you pick up on a very good point, because right? If the Torah is saying something, it means that it's happening, right? So it's more than likely, right, that's what was happening. There were, right? Pharaoh couldn't go back on his mistake, right? And ended up decimating the land of Egypt, killing off a generation of his own kids, let alone the Jews, losing his warriors and chariots and all of the wealth of Egypt, right? Because he couldn't admit a mistake. He had to be infallible, right? So it's easy to point to other examples, to outside of the Jewish community. But clearly this is something that is a repeated pattern. So we're going to look at one example of a fallible king, King David. That's the David Melech Yisrael, in case you didn't know. Okay. But before that, just the Emek HaDavar on Leviticus adds, the Bishgaga, which is the unwittingly, he says it appears to be a misplaced modifier. The Netziv understands our verse to be hinting at a radical claim. The leader's elevated status causes him to commit sins that are so egregious that ordinary people don't even commit them unwittingly. Right? So here we have that there's something about being in that position that's going to make you commit or cause you to commit a sin that you wouldn't have as an ordinary person. Yeah, opportunity, or you might not recognize yourself afterward, that kind of a thing. All right, but we're going to look at the story of David and Bathsheba. Again, notice this is in 2 Samuel, right? Because we don't have a king without having a prophet. We don't have a king without somebody, we don't have a ruler without somebody there in the ruler's ear, maybe not a slave, but a prophet, telling them when they're wrong and how important that is, right? And again, that's something, Roberta, for us to think about, right? That so many of our politicians today surround themselves with yes men and people who agree with them and build them up, hype men, right? Instead of this is the ideal role, is that you want to be surrounded with people who are going to call you out. Okay. So you guys probably know the story of David and Bathsheba. I put it all here. Do you want to read, Victor? I think we have time to read it.
In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out of the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, I am pregnant.
Okay, so let's just pause for a second. Here's the situation. All right, David, this warrior, right, who got his position for taking out Goliath, a literal Goliath, is at home, right, when all of the kings are out at war. And he's bored. So I don't. If you read 2 Samuel, if you read about King David, you understand he is an insomniac. He's always like up at night. He can't sleep. That's when he writes his music and plays on the harp and all of these things. So he's getting up. He's walking around. He sees this beautiful woman bathing, right? And you have to love the that we know that she's clean, right? Because she's bathing. So it must be that she's done with her menses, because God forbid he touch a married woman who was also on her period. So, right? He finds out she's married. It's not have her come over. All right? So already we're wondering about David, right? He's not acting like himself. Or he was acting like himself. All right. Okay, so he finds out she's pregnant, right? So he just got caught, basically, in not only did he take this woman and have an affair with her, right? And this is adultery, even for David, because she is married to someone else. So now we're going to see his attempt at a cover-up. All right, will you keep reading, Victor?
So David sent this word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. David was told Uriah did not go home, so he asked Uriah, "Haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing."
All right, so the irony, right? So first of all, so David's solution is, I know, I'll have Uriah come home, have him go sleep with his wife, he'll think it's his baby, easy peasy, right? But Uriah won't do it. He won't do it. Why? Because the ark of Israel and Judah are staying in tents. My commander, the Lord's men, are in the country. And listen, how could I go to my house, eat, drink, and make love to my wife? This is exactly what David did. Right? Nope. I stayed at home, right? While the Ark of the Covenant, right? And Judah and Israel are out at war, right? When Joab is out waging war, and I stayed home and I ate and I drank and I made love to your wife. All right. Okay. So David, so on the page 4, so David in 12, again, he tries to get Uriah to go home. He gets him drunk, but then he still sleeps on the street. He won't go home. And so, okay, will you read at 14?
14.
Yeah.
So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another."
Okay. All right, so let's pause for a second. Okay, so what does David do? He orders Joab to go into battle and fall back so that Uriah will be killed. And that's what happens. But not only him, right? Some of the men in David's army, right? So other people died. It is bad enough, right, that David is murdering this guy so he doesn't have to admit that he committed adultery, right? But other people died as well. Good people. All right. Okay, so she mourns, and then David has Bathsheba come to his house. But this is the most important line, right? The last, but the thing David had done displeased the Lord. All right, so here we have a man in leadership, right? And he is having a win, not an if kind of moment, right? He has very much sinned, very much gone astray. It has upset God. How is it going to be dealt with? All right. Do you want to keep reading for us? Yes, Jude. It's right behind you. Oh, Sherry has some.
I think we have to recognize that David couldn't have done this if he had not been king at this time. It was the position that allowed him to do all these things, apart from his own natural inclinations. But if he had just been David the shepherd boy, he would not have been in a position to do any of these things, to take the woman who was not his right to take, or to arrange for her husband's death.
Yes.
So the position is what helped corrupt him.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes.
It's good to be the king.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what would have happened if that letter that Uriah was carrying to Joab, if he steamed the envelope, read the letter. What do you think would have happened?
There actually is a very good novel. I'll find it for you guys, but about King David. It's kind of like a historical fiction. It's really, it's so good. It's like a beach read, but it's based on the Bible, so it's really good. Okay, so, all right. So then comes Nathan. All right. So Nathan, the Lord sent Nathan to David. You can just imagine how hard this conversation is to Nathan, right? Talk about having like uncomfortable conversations, speaking truth to power. So, ooh. Is that somebody's phone or is that a... Oh, okay. I was like, are we supposed to evacuate? I don't know. It's not very loud. Okay. All right, thank you. Okay. When he came to him, he said, Nathan said, there were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb that he had bought He raised it, it grew up with him and his children, it shared his food, drank from his cup, even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare the meal for the traveler who'd come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. All right, now David is angry. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for the lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity." Then Nathan says to David, "You are the man." Right? Atahu hagever. Okay. So, and then he goes on to kind of rub it in, right? God says to you, "I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hands of Saul. I gave you your master's house, your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all of Israel and Judah. And if all of this had been too little, I would have given you even more. So why do you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in God's eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." All right, and so then God says, "I'm going to bring calamity," but I want to look at 13. Then David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." All right, that's the whole confession. All right, there's not like a big dramatic, "but I was bored, but she was there," like there was no explanation, just like complete ownership. Okay, why not?
He didn't have that ownership unless he was told. So it really wasn't his ownership. It was like, "Oh, okay, I've sinned against the Lord." I don't believe it's the ownership. It was because he didn't think it was him. He was called out. That's what it was. And if he wasn't called out, it's not a sin. So he didn't think it was a sin.
Okay, interesting and possible.
This story bothers me so much.
Oh, yeah. By the way, I always think of this story when we're singing David Melech Yisrael. I don't know when.
I did not have sex with that lady Lewinsky.
Yes. Right? So he didn't say. Right? All right.
I think that this whole story, or this whole chapter really, is to teach us assuming responsibility for what we do. Yes. And if we do it unwittingly, once we're called out, to be straightforward and assume it. It's about responsibility.
Yes.
It's checking what we do every day during the course of a day. What have we done? Is there anything that we have sinned? If it was unwittingly, to recognize it. And at kama v'kama if it was wittingly.
Beautiful. Right. Oh, Richard.
Just quickly, I hear echoes of Abraham and Tamar. Surely the man that raped you is got to die, or whatever. And it turns out it was him. And the reality is that from Tamar and Abraham to David and Bathsheba, they didn't get it, and neither do we.
Yeah. So your point is made. It's actually Judah and Tamar. So, right? And Judah thinks it's okay. So Judah thinks that his daughter-in-law Tamar has, committed adultery, and it turns out that he was the one that slept with her, thinking she was a prostitute, and realizes his wrong. So again, beautiful example, because he says, what Judah says is, she is more right than me. Beautiful example. So here again we have this moment where David is being called out. It's very egregious. You have to assume that he knew what he was doing was wrong. But at least he owns it. He pays the consequences, right? He doesn't get to build the temple. He is always at war. He loses a child. Yes, he has consequences. Right, so the rabbis, in text 10, just so you know, I gave you this text, the rabbis kind of try and defend David a little bit by saying that when somebody goes out to war, they give their wives a conditional get, right? And this is, of course, the conditional get is to prevent what's called an anchored woman, right? So that if your husband, you're not allowed to remarry unless there's proof positive that your husband has died. So you get this conditional get in case he disappears, his body's never found, whatever it is, so that you are able to remarry, etc. But that being, sorry. Okay, so, but here we're still seeing with King David, even if that were true, right? That he knew Uriah was still alive and that he was coming back. So this little defense mechanism by the rabbis to try and make our leader less fallible is not very strong.
When we see the consequences here occur directly as a result of what was done, and temporally, very quickly, one of the issues that I see is that in the society in which we live, consequences often take a very long time. Acts are done, and they're done for whatever reasons they're done, and often for the wrong reasons, but the consequences of that can take generations before it's deemed to be incorrect.
Yeah.
So you're answering to your own interests, or the interests as you perceive them, which may not be in the interest of society, of course, but society doesn't really see that, and it's easy to gather people to go along with what you're saying, etc., as we've seen, but the consequences that actually teach us don't come for a very long time.
Yes, and it's easy, right? It's easier for us to look back and judge instead of just, being in that position. So Victor, I want to let you. Oh, wait, give me 2 mics
What I
now.
think is the most incredible about this story, even though it's not what we're discussing today, is if this terrible thing didn't happen, King Solomon would have not been born.
Yeah.
And he's such an important part of the history of Israel.
It's true. I think about that a lot. My sister actually wrote her college essay about that, the fact that if the Holocaust hadn't happened, she wouldn't exist. How that messes with her mind. But it's true of other people besides my sister, right? Like King Solomon. That sometimes there is good that comes out of the bad. So, okay, so I know that we are at time, but I have 2 more texts that I wanted to share with you, just the Shemot Rabbah, just talking about how as we take on more of a leadership role, we are holding more responsibility, and we're held accountable in ways that we weren't before. And then one of my favorite texts is from Shabbat 54. Anyone who had the capacity to effectively protest the sinful conduct of members of his household and didn't protest, he himself is apprehended for the sins of the members of his household and punished, right? If you were able, right? If you're in a petition to protest the people of your town and you don't, you're arrested you're guilty of the sins of the people of your town. If you are in a petition to protest the sinful conduct of the whole world and you fail to do so, you're apprehended for the sins of the whole world. It's a very heavy text. So what I want to leave us with is the if and the when. There's so much. We're all very infallible. And in different positions in our lives, we all take on leadership roles. And it's one thing if we mess up and it only affects ourselves, but it's another thing if others see it and it becomes a model. Vayikra is very concerned with creating a holy society and a holy community. And so it becomes concerned with acts we do, not just wittingly, but unwittingly, and how important it is for us to constantly be renegotiating our northern star, right, our compass, and constantly be saying, even if I thought that was right, I realize now in retrospect that it was wrong and I'm going to readjust. And not just doing that privately, but doing it publicly. We live in a society now of social media, which, where everybody's photos are glossed, right? But that is really symbolic of the greater error in our society right now, where we all think not only that we have to appear infallible, but that we have to be infallible. When truly a society, the way that our Torah pictures it, is one that knows it's not an if, it's a when. We're all going to mess up. And how are we going to take ownership of that? And how are we going to create a society where not only does somebody stay in office, right, depending on the mess up, right? The person who is leading our society is celebrated for saying, I have messed up, I can do better, and now I'm going to do better. And how can we create a society where that is true for each of us, where we can each say, I have messed up, now I know better, and I'm going to do better. All right, Shabbat Shalom.
You can vote.
Oh.